In the last tutorial in After Effects, I created some content in After Effects. Now we're going to take a look at one of the more fundamental things about animating with After Effects, and that is the main animation properties that every particular object that you have, or every footage item has. So anyway, I'm going to bring in my solid. Now if you don't have a solid that you've created already, just do Control Y and create a new solid, and I've made mine 500 pixels by 500 pixels so that it is not the same size as my composition. You'll see now I have two of them because I just created a new one. But anyway, you'll see that it is smaller than my composition, and that's good because I can see what's going on. Now, every object that you bring in here, every object you bring onto the timeline, has a certain amount of properties that animate that are inherent to that just being a footage item. If you want to open up the object or the ability to see these, you want to go to the little arrow and then drop that down, and you'll see these are the transform properties. The transform properties are anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Now, one of the things I love about using After Effects is the ability to use quick keyboard shortcuts to be able to see these different items. So one of the ways to use this is to hit the, let's see, if I use A, I can hit anchor point, T is opacity, P is position, S is scale, and then R is rotation. Now, if you want to hide that, press R again, and you'll see it shows and hides. Now, you can also add more than one property to this. If I hit R once, so I can see rotation, and then hit Shift and hit S, then I can see both scale and rotation. So because these are really commonly used properties for animation, they have a keyboard shortcut to access them. Anyway, I'm going to open it up so I can see all of these transforms again. Now, one of the things beside each of these is that you see this little stopwatch. That little stopwatch is what enables animation. If we don't turn that on, we won't see this object animate. In order to start, all you have to do is create a single keyframe. Then you need to go to a different time. So I'll go up to about 5 seconds long, let's say. It's a real pain sometimes. So one of the things that you might do is just get good at typing in the numbers that you want. Or, by the way, since let's say I get back to 5:01, I really want to get back to 5 seconds. You can click and drag this to get there. You can also, let me get off a little bit. You can also hold the Control key down and then nudge your time by 1 frame each left and right arrow as well. So that's something I really like, to be able to get to the exact time that I want. Anyway, now all I have to do is drag that object and move it, and you'll see that it automatically creates an animation from the first location to the second location based on the fact that we've changed that property and we have enabled that object for animation. Now if we also want to rotate, we can click on the stopwatch there, then go to the other time, and here's another trick that I really love. When you already have a keyframe, hold down the Shift key as you get close to it, and you will snap right to it. So that way you can make sure that your other keyframes are aligned. Now you'll see down here with this property, the rotation has two numbers, 0x and then 0.0. If you click and drag, you'll see that I can also modify that property. So sometimes you modify your properties by clicking on the objects themselves, such as scale and position, and sometimes you want to modify them by clicking on the options that you have, or the let's say property value that you currently have. It's kind of just up to you. Of course, it's a little bit hard to move things to the exact point that you want by clicking and dragging on this. But one thing that I do want to point out about these properties that you see here is that you've basically got 4 different number sets going on right now. For the anchor point and position, you'll notice that we have 2 numbers, and that is the X and Y location. If we change this to a 3D object, you'll now see that we have X, Y, and Z, plus we have some other stuff, but I'm going to turn that off for right now. So our anchor point and position both use the same numbering system. Our scale uses a numbering system where we have the ability to lock the two together, and then we have 0 to 100. Well, actually, we have negative bazillion to a positive bazillion, but we have two numbers beside each other, separated by a comma. So, but notice that these really are different than the other ones, but actually you can, because they're the same numbering system, meaning that a digit, comma, digits, you can actually copy one to the other, which is kind of interesting. The next thing is rotation, and this is done in revolutions and degrees. And the last one is opacity, and that only goes to 0 to 100. So that one is limited in that number. So what's important about this is that when you realize that certain numbers are related to each other, it means that you could potentially cut and copy effects from one number to another. For example, try it because I've never really done it. I'm going to select the two keyframes by clicking on both of them, holding down the Shift key. I'm going to cut them with Control X. Now I'm going to go to Scale and paste. And you'll see, haha, there we go. Cannot paste spatial data to temporal data. So that's good to know. It won't allow me because it's not the same sort of stuff. But if I go to anchor point, I can certainly paste that because anchor point and position are very similar to each other. Now you'll notice with this anchor point being different, I've totally changed the way that this object rotates. If I had this, let me Control Z to undo that, and then paste it back into position, you'll notice that the object moves and the rotation happens around the center. That's because the anchor point in this object is currently in the center of that object. If you remember, our object was, or our solid was 500 pixels by 500 pixels, so it means our anchor point is at 250 by 250. If we change our anchor point to another place, you'll see that we are changing the position that is used as the center point of that object, and we completely change the way that that animation works. And notice that, of course, you can have your anchor point completely animated separately than your position points. Even though we copied and pasted one to the other, you can, of course, create your own animation here by clicking on the stopwatch and then applying a new, let's see if we can move that back to the other side here. That's kind of weird, but there we go. So there's my new animation, which is going to look a little wild. And what I've done just now is I want to watch the timeline. So I've just hit the spacebar, and you'll see it kind of plays the timeline. Now, as we start looking at what our animation looks like, you'll notice that there's a few things that we really need to do. For example, I really don't want to play all this stuff after this animation. So why don't I just stop the animation at this 5 seconds so that I'm not seeing anything else. Let me make sure that that's aligned with it. Looked like a keyframe was not aligned there. By the way, you can kind of tell when things are not aligned by the fact that if I am on two keyframes and those are aligned with each other, you'll see I've got two dots here that indicate they're aligned, and this one does not have a dot. If I click on that arrow, it will go to the previous keyframe. So I really want to make sure that these are aligned. And the same thing kind of goes with being able to scrub your timeline. If you want to align that keyframe, hold down the Shift key as you drag it close, and it'll snap to that line that you're currently at. Anyway, in order to stop my animation at this point, one of the things that you often do is determine what is the work area that you're working with right now. There are two great keys to do this. The first key is the B key, which sets the beginning of the work area, and then when you go to the N key sets the end of the work area. Now, I could have gone to the end here and drug this back, but the problem is that I can't really see it right now. And the reason why is because I'm not seeing my entire timeline. If I can see my entire timeline, then I can drag this back if I want. But that seems like a whole lot of trouble when all you have to do is say B and N. Now, because my B was after the start point before, it moved the whole thing. But there, I can go to that, hit N, and you'll see my work area is just this small area. Now, the reason this is important is because oftentimes when you're trying to view things, you're wanting to view just a certain area of it, not the entire thing. So you'll see if you press the space bar, it actually kind of does that by default. It only plays the area that you're working with, the work area. Now this also works with the 0 key over on your numpad too, and that's called RAM Preview. And it basically does the exact same thing as pressing the space bar. So pretty cool. That kind of introduces you to a lot of the basic transform properties of the object, and of course you do want to play with these things more. If you wanted to change your scales so they are not linked together, you'd click off that and start playing with it. But we're going to go through and in the next tutorial look at one of the really fundamental things about After Effects, and that is understanding the rendering pipeline as it applies to these properties such as transform and such. So let's go on.